Hello, all. How are you? Today, we are going to discuss the elements and principles of art. This is our lesson 3 for the midterm period. In today's lesson, we are guided of the following objectives. First, we'll enumerate the different elements of visual and auditory art. Second, we'll differentiate the principles of art. Then third, provide examples of the interrelatedness of some of the elements and principles of art. And lastly, explain the relevance of the elements and principles of art in the study of art and its products or artworks. In the previous chapter, particularly on subject and content, it was mentioned that arts have a specialized language. And to be able to understand this language, the familiarity with some of the elements and principles that make it legible is required. Think of it as the letters, the stringing of letters to formulate words, and perhaps even the different pronunciations and enunciations that assist comprehension. This lesson endeavors to take art and break it into its smaller parts, like a scientist who takes a splice or a sample and places it under a microscope. This lesson allows us for a better view, not of the final picture though, but the parts that complete it. So let's get down to business and the elements of art. Taking off from the scientific reference, elements of art are akin to the atoms that are defined as the units or building blocks of matter. Together in a variety of combinations and formations, they have the ability to create molecules such as water or the more complex sucrose. These formulations are almost the same with elements of art when they are joined together in a variety of ways. In the same line of reasoning, the elements of art, the aspects of an artwork that can be isolated from each other. So these elements, guys, are generally produced when something is done to the medium after the technique is carried out. It must be understood, however, that all works of art require all elements to be present. Some art forms also necessitate some of the elements as they are inherent in the very nature of them. For example, sculptures automatically have the following elements with or without the decision of the artist to include them, such as shape, form, and space. Without these elements, there is no sculpture to begin with, right? Elements are the necessary preconditions for the creation of art. To enumerate, the elements of art and design are the following. First is line, second is shape, third is form, fourth is space, fifth is color, and sixth is texture. So let's start with line. A line refers to a point moving at an identifiable path. It has length and direction, it has also width. It is one dimensional, however, it has the capacity to either define the perimeters of the artwork, like edges, and or become a substantial component of the composition. Although a line is simple, it has variations in view of its orientation or direction, shape, and thickness. These variations import not only the visual elements into the artwork, but suggest meaning or message being conveyed by the artist. Known for using lines to provide the outline or contour of the figures he portrays in his work is Keith Haring. He first executed his artwork entitled Todos Juntos Podemos para el SIDA, or in English, Together We Can Stop AIDS, in Barcelona in 1989. In 2014, it was recreated at the foyer of the Museo de Art Contemporani de Barcelona, or Barcelona Museum of Contemporary Art, to commemorate it. Herring battled with HIV, AIDS, to which he succumbed to it in 1990. So this is the artwork he created. A quality that is ascribed to lines is its ability to direct the eyes to follow movement or provide hints as to a work's focal point. The orientation in which we are most accustomed to, such as the assertive force of gravity grounding objects, or the sideways or up and down vibration that inform us of an earthquake, the gustiness of wind from the window, or the direction of the rainfall conjures different images of lines. So there are types of lines. The first type is horizontal, and I'm sure you are well aware of these. Horizontal lines and vertical lines. So this refers to the orientation of the line. Horizontal lines are are normally associated with rest or calm. Landscapes often contain these elements, as works like these often connote a visual sense of being parallel to the ground. It also alludes to the position of the reclined body at rest. On the other hand, vertical lines connote elevation or height, which is usually taken to mean exaltation or aspiration for action. Together, these two lines communicate stability and firmness. Next type is diagonal and crooked lines. So diagonal lines convey movement and instability, although the progression can be seen. Crooked lines or jagged lines, on the other hand, are reminiscent of violence, conflict, or struggle. Next is curved lines. These are lines that bend or coil. They allude to softness, grace, flexibility, or even sensuality. One of the most important Spanish artists is Francisco de Goya. I think some of you may have known him. Known for his prints, he is a master of etched works and use of aquatint. He made use of this medium to articulate his political views about the ills of society, war, scenes, and even the dreamlike and the grotesque while still engaging with what was happening around him. As with most etchings and other types of prints, lines are dominant visual components. Lines may not necessarily be explicit or literally shown, as what many examples will portray. Implied lines may be just as powerful, if not more. In the the example presented on the slide entitled The Raft of Medusa, the position and orientation of the bodies that are aboard the raft are predominantly diagonal in direction, as you can see. This creates not only movement but also tension in the scene. Based on the actual event, the painting depicts the 1816 wreckage of the French government ship called Medusa. Next elements are shape and form. So these two are related to each other in the sense that they define the space occupied by the object of art. Shape refers to two dimensions, height and width, while form refers to three dimensions, such as height, width, and depth. Even if shapes are part of a bigger picture, each can be identified by breaking the visual components apart and making distinctions based on what we know and what we have seen. Two categories can be used as broad distinction. First is geometric. These shapes find origin in mathematical propositions. As such, its translation and use are often man made. These include shapes such as squares, triangles, cubes, circles, spheres, and cones, among others. So, this is an example. It's P. Mondrian, composition with color, planes, and gray lines, which painted on oil on canvas. And this was um, part of the private collection. The next one is organic. Okay, organic shapes are those readily readily occurring in nature, often irregular and asymmetrical. The design of the vase in this example is a sample from a series that made use of morning glories, right? So shapes can also be implied. For instance, Raphael famous paintings, The Madonna of the Meadows, okay, as seen on the screen, depicts three figures: Mary, the young Jesus, that's on the right, and the young John the Baptist, that's on the left. The positions in which the group takes allude to a triangular shape by the garb of Mary. So, another element is space. Related to shape and form is space. It is usually inferred from a sense of depth, whether it is real or simulated. Real space is three dimensional, like what has been previously mentioned. Sculptures are a perfect example of artworks that bear this element. However, this can only be manifested in two dimensional artworks through the use of different techniques or the use or non use of area around a drawing or a picture. Seen on the screen is Anish Kaput or Cloud Gate in 2004, located in Chicago, Illinois. In the middle of the AT&T Plaza at the Millennium Park in the Loop Community area in Chicago, the iconic Cloud Gate occupies a considerable space. Shaped like a bean, apparently, as you can see, hence its other referent, the public sculpture was unveiled in 2004. The dent in the middle offers a gap in which people can pass through and gaze at the sculpture in a different perspective. However, guys, not all works are sculptures, as we know. In two dimensional artworks, they may be implied. First, positive and negative space. Okay, these spaces usually identified with the white space. Okay, the negative space I mean is identified with white space. Okay, whereas positive space is the space where shadow is heavily used. Okay, so you have negative and positive spaces. Next is three-dimensional space. This can be simulated through a variety of techniques such as shading. An illusion of three-dimensionality can be achieved in a two-dimensional work. All right. Next element is color. Color perhaps is one of the elements that enhances the appeal of an artwork. Its effect has range, allowing the viewers to make responses based on memory, emotion, and instinct, among others. This element is a property of light, as it is reflected off the object. Color is not intrinsic to an object, and without light, one cannot perceive color. Much of what we know about colors begins with the notion of a color theory that was first unraveled by the experiments undertaken by Sir Isaac Newton in 1666. A ray of sunlight passing through a prism reveals an array of colors akin to that of a rainbow. An upshot of this color theory is the creation of a color wheel. So this is it. Okay. So the color wheel corresponds to the first property of color or hue. Hue, this dimension of color gives its name. It can be subdivided into primary colors such as red, yellow, and blue, secondary colors such as green, orange, and violet, and tertiary colors, six in total. Now, these hues are achieved when primary and secondary colors are mixed. Next one is value. This refers to the brightness or darkness of color. Often, this is used by artists to create an illusion of depth and solidity, a particular mood to communicate a feeling, or establishing a scene, for example, day and light. So, light colors are taken as the source of light in the composition, whereas dark colors, the lack or even absence of light. However, we can identify the color even when a range is presented to us. Expectations are also established based on the notion that yellow is within the light value, whereas violet is in the dark, dark. Violet is in the dark value. Each primary color has a range of values based on the addition and diminishing quality and quantity of light. First is tint. So tint, this is a lighter color than the normal value. Example is pink for red. Another one is shade. So this is a darker color. Now that the normal value has. Example, maroon for red. Next one is intensity. This is the color's brightness or dullness. It is identified as the strength of color, whether it is vivid or muted. To achieve a specific intensity of a color, one may add either gray or its contemporary color, like bright or warm colors that these colors give positive energy. Dull or cool colors, these colors give a feeling of sedation or sedate, soothing or seriousness or calm. To better understand intensity of color, color harmonies are to be considered in this case. In interior design, guys, we often hear designers refer to color schemes, a guide for selecting not only wall paint but also furniture and decor. However, color harmonies are also integral considerations not only for pictorial arts but also for other art forms. The first one is monochromatic harmonies. This is used the variations of a hue. An example is Claude Monet's Houses of Parliament. Next harmony is contemporary harmonies. This involve two colors opposite each other in the color wheel. Since they are at contrary positions, the reaction is most intense. An example is this a painting here, Cima da Corneliano by Giovanni Battista Cima, entitled Three Saints. You notice the altarpiece featuring Saint Anthony Abbot and Saint Roch. Along with them is Saint Lucy, the patron of the blind, whose red and green garb beautifully showcases an example of complementary harmonies. The next one is analogous harmonies. This make use of two colors beside each other in the color wheel. An example to illustrate this is Edgar Degas' Before the Race, 1882 to 1884, painted in oil on panel. So other harmonies have emerged, such as triadic harmonies, which make use of three colors from equidistant sites within the color wheel. This, however, does not mean that artists will limit themselves to these kinds of harmonies. These are but jump off points that artists and other creatives use. All in all, color presents a multitude of possibilities that affects how works of art are taken by the viewer, by us as audiences or sets of audiences or spectators. Just taking a look at Fiery, for example, this one, and passionate reds of the clouds at the sky in Edvard Munch, The Scream. I have been using this painting several times in the previous discussions. Would bring oneself to us. Did Munch depict a romantic sunset or a warning of coming horrors? A clue is not in the colors alone, but rather in the face of the man himself that is prominent in the painting. This boy here that seems to be screaming. No? His shriek would point to the latter. What is illustrated is that colors and imagery work together to deliver a message, whether the one intended by the artist or what is facilitated by one or by own experiences by the audience or the spectator of arts. Next one is texture. Like space, texture can be either real or implied. This element in an artwork is experienced through the sense of touch and sight. This element renders the art object um, tactile. Now, this renders the element of art to tactile. Okay, often One example is this one. This is a painting of Margherita Gonzaga, Princess of Mantua. Okay, for both the younger, although I'm not sure how exactly it has to be pronounced. But this was found in the Metropolitan Museum, New York. So often, texture is commonly associated with textiles. In the portrait rendered by court painter Porbo the Younger, Princess Margarita's garb is adorned in opulent bead and stitchwork that are befitting her rank. This was achieved using the techniques employed by the artist in creating the artwork. Textures in the two-dimensional plane. So this is a texture that can be implied using one technique or a combination of other elements of art. By creating this visual quality in the artwork, one can imagine how the surface will feel if it was to be touched. The roughness, okay, of the painting, okay. But of course, if you touch it, it's smooth. But how you perceive it, it would appear that it is rough. Some of the words used to describe texture are the following: rough or smooth, hard or soft, hairy, leathery, sharp or dull, etc. To be able to simulate the texture of a surface in a flat, two-dimensional plan is one important skill that an artist must be familiar with, especially if his idea or concept necessitates it. It depends upon the idea. If the idea necessitates such, then it is important for an artist to simulate the texture with the use of color combinations and different techniques. Next is surface texture. This refers to the texture of a three-dimensional art object. So the elements of art make it possible to engage with the visual and tactile qualities of an artwork through a common language that may be widely understood. Through these elements, guys, there is something from which the idea, concept, message, or intended mood of the artist may be inferred. It offers a starting point or a baseline from which analysis may take place. This kind of analysis is called formal analysis of art. Next section in this discussion is about planes and perspective. Some art forms, or yeah, with actual spaces such as sculptures, architects, and stage designers. However, with pictorial art that is two-dimensional, notions of depth and hence, perspective requires the implementation of principles and techniques in creating an illusion that will fool the eye to three dimensionality when in reality there is none. So, there are a lot of them that we have seen even on several postings on social media that create illusions to the eye. Now that it that's with seeing paintings that appear to be three-dimensional, but in reality they are actually not. Picture plane is the actual surface of the painting or drawing where no illusion of a third dimension exists. Here, the elements lay flat, as if one was looking through a window into what lies on the other side of the glass. During the Renaissance period, specifically in the 15th century, Tchaikovsky Chai Roscoro or Chai Roscoro was developed. It made use of light and dark contrast and tones in which paintings not only looked three-dimensional but also more dramatic. Aside from this technique, linear perspective changed the way pictorial representation was done. Credited to Renaissance artists, its early proponents include Leon Battista Alberti, Paolo Occhilio, and architect Filippo Brunelleschi in the early 15th century, who were published in Albert's Tis on Painting in 1435. Its use was based on the following observations. First, as forms and objects recede, the smaller they become. I think you have observed this, although on some occasions we may not find a inappropriate term to call our this particular perception, but I'm quite sure that you have observed this. The second observation was we were taught that parallel lines never met or never meet. They are parallel lines because they don't intend to meet, right? If there are two lines, if these two parallel lines are to meet, then they are no longer parallel lines, right? However, when they two seem to converge, when they recede into a distance at a point, they both disappear. So this point of disappearance is what we call the vanishing point. Okay. An example often used to illustrate linear perspective is the railroad where tracks disappear off at a distance. I think I have this one. So a viewpoint, this is a a photograph of Partington New Railway Viaduct, interior negative in 1893. Okay, so a viewpoint may also be construed as normal, which is also referred to as view standing up, or low view from a lower angle, or high view looking down on a scene, depending on the position the viewer takes. So depending where the viewer is standing from, or standing the standing point, there you can actually see a different perspective. So there are three types of perspective. Okay, there you go. First one is one point perspective. This is often used in depicting roads, tracks, hallways, or rows of trees. This type of perspective shows parallel lines that seem to converge at a specific and lone vanishing point along the horizontal or horizon line. The second one is two-point perspective. This pertains to a painting or drawing that makes use of two vanishing points, which can be placed anywhere along the horizontal line. It is often used in depicting structures such as houses or buildings in the landscape that are viewed from a specific corner. The third type of perspective, guys, is three-point perspective. In this type of perspective, the viewer is looking at a scene from above or below. As the name suggests, it makes use of three vanishing points, each corresponding to each axis of the scene. Let's take a look at this one. Okay. This is Verenius Abbott, Shannon Building in New York. That was that was photographed in 1935. Okay. Next section is about the elements of art auditory. Okay, in terms of auditory, together with literature, music as an art form is classified as an auditory art. However, some would argue that it is under the broad category of performance art. I think some of you may also argue that it isn't an auditory art but rather a performance art. Either way naman guys, no, music, much like the visual arts, has its own building blocks or elements. Perhaps one of the most widespread forms of art whose intersection in daily life is most perceptible is what? Music. Music is sound organized in a specific time. It is considered an implement to cultural activities, answering a specific role or function. During the times when man had to hunt for food, music was used as a choral to herd animals or as an element of specific rituals or rites. Singing or dancing to music was also often included in opportunities for members of society to gather and interact. Some are adept with the skill and sense to produce music, while others, like myself, consume it as listeners, audiences, and even performers. If there is an important quality that music has, it is having the capacity to transcend barriers, even that of differences in language or conventions in sound. Different demographics, groups, and individuals may have specific preferences as to the genre of music. However, in order to establish this preference, listeners often take to its elements for its evaluation. Some of the common elements of music are the following. First is rhythm, often associated to the terms such as beat, meter, and tempo. Rhythm is the element of music that situates it in time. It is the pulse of the music. Beat, the basic unit of music, while tempo refers to its speed. Beats can be organized into recognizable recurrent pattern, which is called the meter. Classical terms are used to refer to the variations in tempo. Some of them include largo, slowly and broadly, andante, walking pace, moderato, at moderate speed, allegro, fast, vivace, something that is lively, accelerando, gradually speeding up, ralentado, gradually slowing down, alargando, getting slower, broadening, and lastly, rubato, literally rub time. Rhythm is played freely for expressive effect. Next one, guys, is dynamics. The element of music that refers to the loudness or quietness of music is dynamics. Classical terms includes classical terms are used to refer to the different levels pertaining to this, like pianissimo, piano, mezzo, mezzo piano, and mezzo forte, forte, and then fortissimo. When composers indicate an increase or decrease in the loudness, they use the terms crescendo, crescend, no, to the to increase, and decrescendo to decrease, or diminuendo for the latter. Next, guys, is melody. So, you know what melody is, of course. We all know what this is. Melody refers to the linear presentation, horizontal of speech. By horizontal, it means that in musical notation, it is read in succession from left to right. Okay, pitch is the highness and lowness of musical sound. Next is harmony. In melody, if melody is horizontal, harmony is vertical. It arises when pitches are combined to form chords. When several notes are simultaneously played, this refers to a chord. Harmony can be described in terms of its harness. Dissonance is the is the harsh sounding combination, while consonance is the smooth sounding combination. Next, fifth is timbre. Timbre is often likened to the color of music. It is a quality that distinguishes a voice or an instrument from another. Dependent on the technique, the timbre may give a certain tone or characteristic to music, much like how a painter evokes different effects or impressions onto the canvas. Sixth, guys, is texture. The number of melodies, the type of layers, and the relatedness in a composition is the texture of music. It can be monophonic, single melodic line, polyphonic, as the term implies, more, poly, two or more melodic lines, and homophonic, mean medley accompanied by chords. So akin to artwork, so style, medium, and technique emphasize some of the elements in visual arts. A composition and genre of music may emphasize the elements of music previously outlined as well. Some elements may even be de-emphasized or omitted altogether. Like what was mentioned, like what like what I mentioned, these elements may be desolated from each other. However, as visual or musical compositions, the combinations of these elements in art is what we actually initially discuss or engage with in the beginning of this discussion. Most often, elements do not only coexist in the artwork, but are fused together or overlapped with each other. In visual arts, most artworks have overlapping elements. Okay, next section of this presentation is the principles of art. I hope that you are still able to listen to this discussion, that you are able to sustain the discussion from the beginning up to this point. So to reiterate, the appreciation and engagement of art relies substantially on being equipped with the appropriate language that allows it to be more comprehensible. In my previous discussion on art criticism, um we mentioned that to be able to evaluate art, we must we must be equipped with the knowledge on the elements and principles of arts, right? If the elements of art were like the letters, combining these letters will form words, phrases, and sentences, then the principles of art would perhaps be the closest to the rules of grammar and composition. Learning these principles will lessen the intimidation and might even open vast possibilities for newbies like us, to have a more pleasurable experiences of arts. These very principles will provide explicit ways in which these elements are used, how they are manipulated, how they interact, and how they inform the overall composition of the artwork to assist the artist in conveying his intention. It is the principles of art that influence the effect achieved by the elements and the linkages of the other principles. These principles are: first, balance. Although I think I have already provided you a handout of this one, but I would want to discuss or review those elements, those principles here. The first principle, guys, is balance. So this principle refers to the distribution of the visual elements in view of their placement in relation to each other. So balance, how things are properly distributed. An example of this that that illustrates balance is this one, the Isamu no Gucci, or the cube, which is found in the entrance of Marine Midland Building in Manhattan. Okay, these are three forms of balance, guys. First is symmetrical. The elements used on one side are reflected on the other, as the term implies, symmetrical. This offers the most stable visual sense to any artwork. we we have been experiencing this a lot, no, when we are doing an artwork. Uh we would love to see, when we put something on left side, it is like a common thing na lagyan din natin yung right, kasi we want things to be symmetrical. Because personally din, no, it allows stability, stable visual sense, kasi we can look at these two objects on both sides as how it is in this um the okay, Liman oblation statue. The next one is asymmetrical. The elements are not the same or of the same weight on each side, putting the heaviness on one side. So there isn't really balance when it comes to weight or maybe size, or depending on what is seen on the other side and the other side as well. The radial, this is a central point in the composition around which elements or objects are distributed. Persian radius. Third, next one, guys, is scale and proportion. Scale pertains to the size in relation to what is normal for the figure or object in question, just like this one. No, the apparently this is a um I don't know if it is what kind of equipment is this, but it appears to me it's a shovel or not, the used in masonry. Okay, so sculptures of exaggerate scale are common all over the world as many artists are taken by the whimsical quality of these objects. One cannot help but smile, of course. We can laugh out how sometimes how silly artists have become, no, to creating masterpieces like oversized shovel or um oversized objects. Okay. In the Philippines, Arturo Luz has created enormous sculptural versions of the paper clip. I don't know if you have seen that one. Ng overly sized na clip, paper clip. For a long time, it occupied a prominent spot at the entrance of Ayala Museum. If you have went there, if you have gone there, you could see it. Proportion, on the other hand, is the size of the components or of object in relation to another when taken as a composition or a unit. This can also refer to values such as amounts or number of elements or objects in the composition. One of the most common canons asserted related to the proportion of the body of the to the proportion of the body. This varies from culture or tradition to another. For Egyptian artists, guys, the human form follows a square grid and is informed by a palm of the hand as a unit of measure. To complete a standing human figure, 18 units square are needed from head to foot. That's why if you have seen an artist, they create grid first before they would draw a face. Okay? On the other hand, Greeks held that numerical relationships, the golden ratio, was the key to beauty or to perfection. In the golden ratio, the figure is divided into two unequal segments, wherein the smaller is the same ratio to the larger segment, and that the longer segment is the same ratio is in relation to the whole. In this particular example, it's Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man that was created in 1490. Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man is an exploration on the ideas of the Roman architect Vitruvius, in which the human body is an example of classical proportion in architecture. For Da Vinci, man's body can be used to better understand the symmetry that exists in nature and the universe. Proportion can be divided, or proportion can be first natural. This particularly relates to the realistic size of the visual elements in the artwork, especially for figurative artworks. When it is the accuracy in relation to the real world that the artist is after, this is now referred to as the principles of scale. Next is exaggerated. This refers to the unusual size relations of visual elements, deliberately, no, exaggerating the immensity or minuteness of an object. Super big or super small, no? Oversized or very maliit, like a miniature. In relation to this, there are notions in scale that differentiate when an element is smaller than expected, that is diminutive, and when something appears to be larger than what is presumed, that is monumental, the one that you we get to see on monuments. Okay. Next one is idealized, most common to those that follow canons of perfection, the size relations of elements or objects which achieve the most ideal size relations. Next, guys, are emphasis and contrast. Emphasis allows the attention of the viewer to a focal point or points, accentuating, or drawing attention to these elements or objects. This can be done through the manipulation of the elements or through the assistance of other principles, especially that of contrast. Contrast, conversely, contrast is the disparity between the elements that figure into the composition. One object may be made stronger compared to the other objects, hence its emphasis. This can be done in many ways using the elements of art. For instance, space, specifically the use of negative and positive space, diba? Shadow and the white space, remember, is an example of contrast like yin yang. Another example is the use of complementary colors in a work of art. Fifth and sixth, guys, are unity and variety. Unless intended to be otherwise, compositions are intended to imbue a sense of accord for completeness from the artwork. This is called unity, such as this one. Now, this is Basudhara Mandala, okay? Um, Found in the Metropolitan Museum Art, New York. Variety, on the other hand, is the principle that aims to retain the interest by allowing patches or areas that both excite and allow the eye to rest. Seventh is harmony. Like what is hinted above in the previous um, elements, unity and variety is related to the principle of harmony, in which the elements or objects achieve a sense of flow and interconnectedness. We can achieve harmony by looking into the um if the elements are unified according to the variety as well, and that there is a sense of flow, and all the elements are connected. And how are they connected? Their interrelatedness or interconnectedness. Next, guys, is movement. This refers to the direction of the viewing eye as it goes through the artwork, often guided by the areas or elements that are emphasized. These focal points can be lines, edges, shape, and color within the work of art, among others. Then, number nine is rhythm. This is created when an element is repeated, creating implied movement. Variety of repetition helps invigorate rhythm as depicted in the artwork. And lastly, repetition and pattern. Lines, shapes, colors, and other elements may appear in an artwork in a recurring manner. This is called repetition, as the term implies. In addition, the image created out of repetition is called pattern. With repetition, guys, there is a sense of predictability that is conveyed. Kasi we can now see patterns. There is repetition, and this what makes up a reoccurring manner that is now called pattern, which in turn imbues the feelings of security and calmness. Example is this one, okay? This is Van Gogh's Labor Shoes, a woman rocking a cradle. So, this was also found in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So, looking at these elements and principles of art that we have just discussed, it is apparent that art may be defined under strict lines that separate one art form or style to another. In a broad sense, guys, it is easy to decipher visual arts from auditory arts, based on its elements, of course. In the same vein, when looking at more specific art forms, there is a considerable is when one is confronted with the challenge of differentiating a painting from a sculpture, a print from a drawing, or a soundtrack from a poem. However, when the complexity of contemporary times in which experimentation and innovation are encouraged, the arts are not exempted from increasing overlaps, merger, and fusion of different aspects of art production and their resultant consumption. As time changes, in the future, there might also be overlapping concepts with this different type, different art forms. Although we could tell apparently that it's easier to identify with what type of art it is. One of the buzzwords at the tail end of the 20th century is interdisciplinarity, rooted on the realization that the problems of society are becoming more and more complex. It is necessary that solutions become innovative, wherein alternative routes to what is familiar, common, and customary are given premium. It was also a direct upshot to what is to postmodernist ideas to make in which barriers were more porous, strict delineation of art forms was overwhelmed, was overthrown, to make way for collaborations and partnerships between fields, professionals, and even creatives. The idea of a single medium based art seems like a strange past that no longer holds in interdisciplinary reality we live in. In contemporary art, these developments were mirrored in the multifaceted nature of artworks that were created. It is not surprising to me and to us that themes, subjects, and the problematic addressed shape and produce new kinds of articulation in which two or more art forms and styles are combined. Some examples of combined arts include dance, theater, installation art, film, video art, documentary, photography, puppetry, design, and other forms of production. So these combined art forms are interesting specimens that can be studied to understand what art forms and styles have been combined, and furthermore, what skills, techniques, or creative processes can be put together to produce interesting and innovative compositions. In combined arts, improvisation is often tapped in addition to practical and logical considerations of an artwork. Okay, so generally, in any art appreciation course like our course, okay, this lesson on the elements and principles of art are considered one of the most rudimentary stages in easing us into a meaningful experience with art, regardless of its form. A familiarity with these building blocks of composition and formal analysis will, will aid us into our attempt to come into terms with the intention of the artist. The elements and principles of art are essential to any artwork. Some of them will be more obvious than others, becoming the anchors in which the viewer may latch on to engage with the artwork. The focal points that draw the attention of the viewer is also interesting to note, as this provides insight to the interests and values that are of most weight to us, okay, or to people, to viewers. This perhaps will help create a bridge which a person who may not normally find pleasure in looking at art may consider future engagements with it, just like just like um just like us audiences who may have not yet developed that sense of appreciation, um or may have not normally find pleasure in looking at art. Because you are not, some of us or many of us are not really into artwork. So in short, guys, familiarity of the elements and principles has the potential to break the barriers in which art becomes ineffaceable. So, and that eventually it is hoped that now knowing these elements and principles would allow us to better understand artworks and eventually help us develop a sense of appreciation towards artworks regardless of its form, no, regardless of the types of artwork that we would want to engage ourselves into. Okay, and for the reference, this is from Castle Bernardo Nicholas et al. 2018. Thank you so much, everyone.